Ladies and gentlemen, as the family's coming in, let's get everybody silent. If you have a cell phone or pager, if you could turn it to the silent mode. And just a reminder, if you have a cell phone or pager, if you could turn it to the silent mode. Appreciate it, Rabbi Ari Hart.
Gathered here this morning to remember an incredible human being, Eileen Himelman, daughter of Shlomi and Bella, beloved wife to Wolf, beloved mother to Harry, to Billy, beloved grandmother to David and Francesca, Doda Chaya to many nieces and nephews across the world. We'll open this morning, as we do, with Tehillim, with Psalms. Read Psalm 23, a song about perseverance in the face of the shadow of death. Rabbi Hodi Nimas will lead us in Tehillim.
Mizmor leDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, bino deshe yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yena'aleini. Nafshi yeshovei, v'yancheni v'maglei tzedek, leman shemo, gam ki elech b'geitz al mavet, lo ira ra ki ata imadi, shivtecha u'mishantecha, heima yemach yenachamuni, taroch lefanai shulchan, neged sorai, Tishanta b'Hashem en roshi, kosi rivayam, achto v'chesed yirdefuni, ko yemei chayai, v'shavti b'beit Adonai, liorech yamim. Song of David, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. God causes me to lie down in lush pastures. God leads me beside tranquil waters. God restores my soul and guides me in righteous paths. For God's name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your scepter and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in full view of my adversaries. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of days.
When remembering someone like Chaya, a crucial part of our work is to tell the story. It's said that a tzaddik, a righteous person, leaves an impression, leaves a roshem, a spiritual impression on a town when they leave. And I very much feel that with Chaya's passing. There's an impression that has been left, but it's an impression that we must continue to tell. And part of that work is just telling the story, an amazing story. Unbelievable story. I'll tell a bit of the biographical sketch, and then Harry will tell the story more with some reflections, and then we'll conclude with final words of Torah and a prayer for her neshama. Chai was born in 1928 to Shlomi and Bela, the youngest, 7 siblings with 6 older brothers, Shea, Sonny, Fisher, Ephraim, Aryeh, Avram, and little Chaya, where she was the spoiled one. Shul, or as she pronounced it, Sheil, was a central part of her life in a very religious home. Her father, who attended every day, and each Shabbos would bring home guests. Home of love and hospitality, surrounded by Yiddishkeit and family. An ideal childhood that was shattered. We'll hear more from Harry. She went through things then cannot be imagined. She grew up so fast, too fast. Hearing and seeing and feeling things that no person should endure, certainly no child. And then, remarkably, reunited with family. We'll hear more of the story from Harry. And then went on to build a life, first in Israel, a state that meant so much to her, an ahuzah, a holding, a place. And then here in Chicago, with her beloved Wolf, who tragically passed away after a few brief years of marriage, in her arms on the kitchen floor in 1973. She continued to raise two beautiful sons, Harry and Billy, who, it must be said, now in this space, did so much for her, cared for her, loved her, honored her in such a profound, deep way, all the way until the very end. Sons who really fulfilled that commandment of honoring one's parents to the most exceptional degree, bringing her here every Shabbat, a constant presence in her home, taking care of her every need, all the way until the very end, allowing her to live and to die as she wished, independent in her home and with dignity. She lived on after that loss, with her sons by her side and family and friends. Shul, a central part of her life, first at Agudat Jacob, and then when it merged with Skokie Valley, here, her spiritual home. She was a regular in this space, a symbol of strength for so many of us, a symbol of pride and Yiddishkeit, of endurance. And she was also just a regular person, kind and tough, very funny, stubborn, sharp until the very end, and beloved. We'll hear some words now from her son, Harry.
So my name is Harry Himelman, known to many of you who've known me for most of my life as Harold Himelman or Harry. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you on behalf of my brother that you are here and my family. My wife and my Margarita, my son David, and my daughter Francesca. So I want to share a few more thoughts about Mom. Many of you met her, many of you knew her for a number of years. And as Rabbi Hart stated, she was a tough woman, stubborn, funny. And that's what kept her going, being tough and funny and mostly stubborn. Sometimes to the truth, but still, that worked till the very end. The very end, she was stubborn. Even lying in her bed, she kept on refusing certain things because she was tough and she was stubborn. That personality formed years and years ago when she grew up in Romania, in a town called Gura Umaru. I said it properly on the way here. Gura Umaru, a resort town in Romania. This was a town relatively small by our standards, fewer than 15,000 people. It's a resort town, beautiful. Mom loved it growing up as a little child. She did everything that children do. Ice skating, playing with friends, until about her 10th year or so. Then things changed. The time frame we're talking about is the 30s. And things changed in the mid-30s, later 30s, when, as most of us know, the Germans came, and her family turned her world and her family's world upside down. Her family consisted of, as you've heard, her father, her mother, and her 6 brothers. There was one other girl in the family who died as an infant. And so many people think that it was just she and her 6 brothers for a total of 7. But there was an 8th who didn't make it, who didn't survive. So she, Mom, was the youngest in the family. She was the baby, and so she was the recipient of being spoiled by her father and all the guys in the family, the other guys in the family, her brothers. So after the Germans came, not only did they change her world, but the neighbors somehow were changed as well and took over their lives, the family lives, and forced Mom and her family out of the house that she had grown up in. They were forced to march many, many miles, kilometers, as she said, to trains, to cattle cars where they were transported, again, for many miles. And she didn't know where they were going. Eventually, ultimately, they wound up in Ukraine, eastern Ukraine. This was 1941. She was then 12, 13 years old. They were forced, she and her brothers, to a camp, a labor camp, and to work at hard labor in a camp called Marafa. She and Mom survived. Actually, her brother survived too. Although after the war, around 1945, they had left. I don't have the chronology well here in my head. But they left, and Mom and her mother, Ella, returned back home to Gura and found that their home was now occupied by their neighbors, who refused to return to home to Mom and my grandmother. They said, it's no longer your home, it is now our home, and all the things in the home are ours, not yours. And Mom tells a story that when she was in the house after she and her grandma returned, she saw the dining room table. There was a tablecloth. That tablecloth, the dining room table, was handmade by my grandmother, embroidered, handmade, and they, these neighbors, usurped this tablecloth as well. So Mom, being an ancient, stubborn, tough one, went over to the table, grabbed the tablecloth, pulled the tablecloth off the table, and everything that was on the table just fell over, and then Mom and Grandma left. It was another year or so when Mom made her way with Grandma at some point to Israel, then Palestine. It's 1947. But prior to getting in, there, as you well know, the history, were blocked from coming into Palestine because of the British wouldn't allow them to enter. So 8 months was spent in Cyprus at another camp, Dusty Camp. And finally, though, she made it to Haifa, the Haifa port, and found a place to live, and eventually met my father, Wolf. Dad died a long time ago, 1973. He was 50, she was 44. And she persevered through all these years, notwithstanding his departure from her life and our lives. So back in 1948, that's when the Israeli Navy was formed. And I mention that because Dad worked. He was part of the Israeli Navy. And so he pursued her. She played hard to get, and she loved him. And so she finally and wisely, relented. She worked hard as a waitress in Haifa, and they, in 49, I believe. Get it right down. Got married and had a good house, good household. She was the, as they say in Hebrew, Bal Habayit. She was the Bal Mustayish, the master of the house. Nevertheless, it was my dad who, even though he was easygoing, even though he let her do what she thought was right, and he knew was right, she would follow his lead. So when the time came that my dad received an invitation from his aunt and Uncle Joe and Aunt Minnie, who lived in Chicago, in Albany Park, and they said, come to the States, come to America, we'll sponsor you. And they did. The only caveat, which my father agreed to, is that he had to sign a document that he would stay off the dole. Those of you who are really young, I don't see teenagers here, but that means not taking anything from the government, getting a job, in other words. So we came, we got on a boat, a ship. It took us 2 weeks. I had a good time. I was only 7.5 or 8 years old at the time. I remember Mom just doing her usual mom stuff on the boat. And when we got here, we stayed with Uncle Joe and Aunt Minnie for a couple of weeks in Albany Park on Lawndale. We moved a couple weeks thereafter, also in Lawndale, a couple blocks north. I started going to school, grammar school, Houghton Grammar School, where I met some of the wonderful friends I've known for a long, long, long time. And then we moved across Lawrence, which meant a different grammar school. This was Volta. And I met more wonderful friends with whom I stay in touch to this day. Dearly. So after a couple of years, we moved to Rogers Park. Now I was still in high school, so I continued going to high school in Albany Park because that's where my friends were. That's where I wanted to be. I didn't want to go to a different school. That's where I graduated from. During this entire time, Mom worked. She always worked. Started working at Beavis Brothers Bakery on Lawrence, near Drake. We had moved to Drake Avenue, 4932 North Drake Avenue. Sort of rhymes, just one reason if you can't remember it. And she just walked a couple blocks to the bakery. Early morning, of course, she was in the bakery, so it was early that she started working. And worked for years. Sometimes she, as I remember, was reminded earlier, she would give a cookie here and there to my wonderful friends. And then, back in 1973, so a few years when I was still in college, my father passed away. And she hung in there. It was really rough, but she did hang in there. So no matter what house we lived in, what apartment we lived in, what house we lived in, and where she lived, she was always the master of the house. She was always willing to feed people. If you walk in, and me and my friends did, to her house, her frequent question would be, you want to eat? And she would feed. She lived to feed. And especially her chicken soup and mandel bread, which I do have the recipe for. I have not attempted it. To bake mandel bread. To my dismay, I will. I really doubt that it's going to turn out as good as Mom's. But at least I've got the recipe. So, she passed away earlier this week on her terms, in her house, in her bed. Stuck her to the end. I want to thank all of you for being here. understand the pillar of strength for us, for me. There's a line by Irving Berlin. The song is ended, but the melody lingers on. And so it is.
The week Chaya passed, we read a story in the Torah about daughters of Tzlofchad, 5 daughters. Their names: Machla, Noah, Chogla, Milcha, and Tirza. They're the daughters of a man who was Meit Bamidbar, who died in the wilderness. The daughters of a man who died in the wilderness. Yesterday, I had the great zchut to watch about an hour of Chaya's Holocaust testimony captured by the Shoah Foundation. And I had heard bits and pieces of the story from her over the years, but I had not heard it all at once and in detail. And she spoke in that testimony about that labor camp and how her father became ill and he was taken away and shot, murdered. He was lost in the wilderness. That loss of her father stayed with her for her whole life. Now the loss of her husband stayed with her whole life. Avinu Meitz Bamidbar, our father has died in the wilderness. And then the daughters say, Lama Yigarashim Avinu. Why should our father's name be lost? They protest. Tnu Lanu Achuzah, give us something to hold on to. In the case of the Torah, they're referring to land. Give us land. They want to inherit land in the land of Israel so that their father's name can live on. Because in the current laws of inheritance, there would be no land and the father's name would be lost. So their way of saying, let our father live on, is give us an achuzah, give us a holding of land. And because of the daughters' bravery, their humility, their stubbornness, their chutzpah, the law has changed. In the Torah, the law changes. Moses doesn't know what to do. God says they are right. Change the law. Make sure their father does not be forgotten. Make sure he's remembered. And the daughters of Tzlofchad gain an achuzah. They gain an inheritance. This morning, I want to add a 6th daughter to the daughters of Tzlofchad, a 20th century daughter. A daughter of a man who was killed in the wilderness. The daughter of a people who was almost forgotten. But someone through will, through chutzpah, through determination and humility, someone who was able to take an achuzah, to hold on, and to ensure that his name, and in some ways all of our names, would not be forgotten. Her name is Chaya. Kishma Kain Hi, like her name she was. Chaya, of course, means life. Her name was life. And Chaya had that rawness, that pure force of life. Life with joy, life with pain, life with spirit, life with loss. That force of life flowed through her so powerfully. How else could one survive the cattle cars, the death marches, the family separation? There's a story I want to tell that I also learned yesterday, that in the camp, she was separated from her family. She found a way, a hole in the fence, so that her brother could escape, and she told him of the hole. So her brother escaped. And then she was caught. They knew she had done something. They didn't know exactly what. So the guards pulled her away and sent her to be deported from the labor camp to who knows where, onto another cattle car, where she connected with a family she didn't even know, and endured months alone at the age of, I think, 13. Months of hiding in fields, months of eating beetroots and raw corn, moving around in the cover of night from field to field through the Ukrainian wilderness, and then ultimately reuniting and finding her way back after the liberation of the camp to reunite with her family. Unbelievable. How could you survive that? How could you survive the loss of a spouse in your arms? How could you survive being a working single mom? All those things. if not but for the very force of life, that fundamental charge of the Torah, the chai b'hem, live by them. Life flowed through her so powerfully. You felt it. You felt it in her presence. You felt it in her body. Someone who experienced in one small human body the greatest highs, the state of Israel, the greatest lows, the Holocaust, the Jewish people have endured in 2,000 years. A body which endured starvation, beatings, and disease. A body which she schlepped to shul well into her 90s. And you can see physically how much physical pain she was in as she moved. But she just kept going. Her desire for life and to live and to give life to others, greater than the pain and the suffering. I felt the force of life in her eyes, which would tear up when she would speak about her father and her brother, who she also lost in the 1948 war in Israel. Her eyes, which had great sadness, but were also so strong, so piercingly tchelet blue. And her gaze could just hold you. She would look at you, be silent, and you couldn't look away. Just held you in that powerful gaze. Her eyes. And in her hands, which by the end were very crooked and bent and twisted. Those hands which cooked food in a concentration camp as a teenager, worked to support her children, hands that baked that mantle bread well into her 90s, hands that cut the tops off of shoes when her children had no new shoes to wear so that the shoes could last another season when they were desperately poor in Haifa. Hands that held my hands, and I felt a deep comfort and strength in her twisted hands. Chaya was the fierce stubbornness of life, holding on, tnuli achuzah, holding on, demanding to hold on, which is really the holiest mitzvah in the Torah, to choose life, which for someone like Chaya, I bet that many times in her life that was not a simple choice, to choose life, to choose to keep going when the other alternative was very apparent and very easy to choose. But she chose over and over again to hold on, to hold her claims. Nuli achuzah, give me something to hold. The achuzah of children, whom she held so fast to. The achuzah of grandchildren, whom she loved so dearly and spoke about with such reverence and care and tenderness. The achuzah of grandnieces and grandnephews, of whom she was so proud. Dodechayim. The achuzah, the holding of a home, which she wouldn't leave. The achuzah of the land and the state of Israel, which meant the world to her, a holding. I had the great merit over the last few years to spend time with Chaya in that home, and to bring me my son to meet with her and spend time with her. I'm very grateful for that. I'll never forget, I think it was the second time I visited her. She told me the story of the tablecloth. And I watched her tell it again on that video. And I want to tell it one more time because it's an amazing story. And I want to quote her words in her testimony. She came back after the war. The German neighbors had all their stuff. And apparently the German neighbors had offered that we'll watch this, and when you come back, we'll give it to you. They had promised that before the war. So they knocked on the door. The neighbor opened it. They said, "You came back." And the neighbor was stunned. The neighbor says, "You're alive?" He says, "Yes, we're not ghosts. We're alive. And we want our things back." And the neighbor said, "No, it doesn't belong to you anymore." And the Chaya says in the video, "I saw a tablecloth that my mom had sewn on their table. And I walked over and I grabbed it and said, 'You will never get it.' And we never went back again." When I was in her home, that second time, she tells me the story. And she gets up and she walks over to her closet, reaches in, and grabs the tablecloth and says, "This is the tablecloth." I almost fell out of my chair. "Give us our holding." She took it. of Genesis, after Joseph has been separated from his family and united with his brothers, he asks the famous question, Ha'od avichai? Is my father still alive? And that question is not actually answered in the Torah. It's left hanging. So the answer to Yosef's question, and maybe to Chaya's question, Snuli Achuzah, is that yes, 2,000 years later, Od Avinu Chai. 2,000 years later, Am Yisrael Chai. Our father still lives, the Jewish people still lives, because of people like Chaya, who held fast to life, family's life, people's life. But you can't hold on forever. And now, it is up to us to hold her memory, to hold her example, to hold her values, to hold like she did a fierce and passionate, determined love of life. She has released it, but now it's in our hands. Now it's in our hands. May your memory be for a blessing. Please rise as we recite Omalei, prayer for the ascent of your soul. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Mamromim, Hamsei Menucha Nechona, Al Kanfei Hashanah, B'malot Kedoshim U'Teorim, Kezor Rakia Mazirim, and Nishmat Chaya B'Shlomi, Shachal Le'olamah, Bavur Shanachnu Mitpalim B'Nazra Nishmata, Began Eden Tnei Menuchata, Lachein Bala Rachamim Yastireh B'Setek Nafav Le'olamim, V'Yitzor B'Tzarchaim Nishmata, Adonai Unachalata, V'Tanoch B'Shalom HaMishkava, V'Nomar Amen. God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant proper rest on the sheltering wings of your presence, and the lofty levels of the holy and pure who shine as the brightness of the firmament, unto the soul of Chaya ben Shlomi, who has gone to her world, and for whose memory we pray. May her rest be in paradise. May the Master of Compassion bring her under the cover of God's wings and bind her soul in the bond of life. May the Lord be your heritage, and may she rest on her resting place in peace. And let us respond. Amen.
This concludes the funeral here at the synagogue. The interment will be at Waldheim Cemetery. For those who will be driving to the cemetery, we'll be lining up right in front of the temple. We'll be placing a magnetic flag in your vehicle. We ask that you have your headlights and hazard lights on while driving the procession, and drive as close as safety permits to the vehicle in front of you. At the conclusion of the interment, the family will be returning to the Skokie Valley Good and Jacob Social Hall, where they'll be here from 2 to 5:30 p.m. on Sunday from 2 to 4 p.m. Please remain standing as the family escorts to the sanctuary. Once the family is left, we'll ask everybody to please go immediately to their vehicles. If you'll be going to the cemetery, we'll be lining up right in front of the temple.